Alrighty, folks. Happy last working Monday of the year. This is the December 16th OpenJS Security Cloud Space slash working group meeting. So today we've got a few different topics to cover. So first off, we have Ryan here from Socket to talk about the JavaScript security training. We have Daniel here to talk about some of the stuff that he is working on. And if we have time at the end, I have some updates on the progress we've been making on the on the um, compliance guidelines and running that through folks. Yes, there is a notes doc right uh, here. All right, cool. So I think just to kind of work through things, Ryan, how about we get started with you? It's nice to meet you.
Sure. Nice to meet you all. My name is Ryan. I'm working on this web security course. I haven't been given a whole lot of context about the course. I just have been told to develop a web security course. So I'll show you the outline of content that I had planned. Um, and then whatever feedback you have would be very helpful if it's in line with what you're expecting or different. But I'll share my screen really quickly. And yeah, so there's an email thread. I'm not sure if everyone here received it, but there's a subject line was feedback requested OpenJS security training outline. Um, and it's basically planning a text-based course. So each of these lessons will be like its own page. Um, and start with an overview of why this is interesting and useful material to learn, and then cover a couple of fundamentals, HTML, JavaScript. Um, we won't go into TCP, but we'll mention TCP and DNS and HTTP. Um, talk about the same origin policy, cookies and sessions, session-based attacks, CSRF, cross-site scripting, um, and then some like SQL injection and command injection. And then lastly, talk about supply chain security specific to NPM. Um, and I think this is the only really like JavaScript focused piece in here. The other parts are pretty standard. But let me know what you think and if you have any feedback on this.
Ryan, how would you like to receive feedback?
Um, in terms of medium or
Yeah, I mean, like if folks have, it might be best for folks to like look at this, outside of this meeting, and if they want to give you
yeah.
feedback, should we set up a doc or something, or do you just want an email?
Anything works for me, whatever's most convenient for you. So if you just have a couple of thoughts that you want to send me an email, my email is ryan@socket.dev. If you have more extensive, if you prefer to like leave inline comments or something, feel free to copy this into a Google Doc and annotate it and then send that to me. That works as well.
I do recall when Faraz visited and talked about this, I found the doc here that he asked us to give feedback on. Um, so here, I just dropped it in chat. And I think we gave feedback on this document at the time. It's
I see.
pretty different, but we can I guess um, if you want to bring that up on the screen, Ryan, so folks can see. But yeah, that was
Yeah.
the original thing. So I'm not sure if we want to replace this doc with another one.
Yeah, thanks for sending that to me. I was not aware of this doc. I'll change the sharing to this. In the right window. Um, are there comments in this one, or had there already been comments here?
Yeah, I think there were comments and they all got closed out.
I see. Okay, so
Yeah.
I see you worked out the outline here. I can take a look at this, and I think it would actually be more helpful for me to see what the comments were previously. Uh, cannot see version history.
You
Um, I
should be,
I would
yeah.
I
You
would
can see the
say
comments if you click the little icon next to share on the left of share. That
I
should show
see.
you everything that's been resolved. Yeah.
Mhm. Oh, I see here. Okay, so the suggestion is to focus on JavaScript language and runtime security. I think, does anyone have ideas for content that you would particularly like to see that is more JavaScript focused? I think there's a little bit in here about like writing safe code, um, and then a little bit here about JavaScript specific uh, stuff, but I think most of this is also similarly general web security content.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the obvious like idealistic ideal would be to have people walk away from the course with as much knowledge as possible, but the obvious we have to limit scope in order to make it practical. So I think we just need to, or you maybe, but a decision needs to be made about what knowledge we expect people coming into the course to already have.
Hmm.
And if so, that strikes me as like either where you're this is like an intro to security with a JavaScript focus, or it's a people who already understand some things about web security and security in general getting who want JavaScript specific information. And those are
Right.
two sort of different courses. Arguably, you could have them be one course that leads into another. Um, but I don't know which one is more valuable for us to have.
Yeah, makes sense. Um, do people have thoughts on, is particularly like stakeholders, which one is more valuable?
I was going to add to kind of what Jordan was saying. I think they're both valuable, to be honest.
Right.
Anything with security and doing better there to me is important. But I was wondering, there's also the library author side of things, and how to avoid writing a prototype pollution attack, or or all that kind of the stuff that we always see in a CVE on a JavaScript library. How to avoid
Right.
those type of things too.
Yeah.
Um, in general. I liked Faras's agenda a little bit more because it got into the TLS configuration and that kind of stuff, which as an enterprise at Capital One, we have challenges getting people to not turn on the right things all the time. And so
Hmm.
making sure that, how to configure a certificate for Node and just the basics of that kind of stuff is always important too from a user's perspective
Right.
versus going with the Node TLS.
Alexa, turn off Twinkle.
Yeah, all the turn
Alexa,
off.
turn off Tree.
Yeah. So I would love to see a focus on that as part of the runtime security stuff too, for
Alexa,
service.
turn off Tree.
Got it. Cool.
Pause.
Let me think a little bit more about this, and I will probably try to target some middle ground that is mostly a security in general from the context of JavaScript, but then I'll try to include like a lesson or two that gets more in the weeds,
Maybe this
such
one.
as the TLS configuration and
Do
like
this.
avoiding prototype pollution and whatnot.
All right, go to your place. Good boy. Go to your place. Good boy.
So what's going on, Jordan? Are you fighting with
Soren's having some
what Soren?
problems right
Chances
now.
Oh,
he's
sorry. I was
talking
talking to my
to
dog. I didn't realize I was unmuted.
Dog and a
so
wag attack.
I thought you
He's
were
fighting all the
talking
things
for a
right now.
sec to Ryan for a second. It was very
No, it's just
confusing.
it's been raining outside, and the dog just came inside. I had to dry him off. I'm really sorry.
No, you're
No, you're
good.
all good. It was funny more than anything.
Yeah.
Also, I was wondering, is there I don't know how the Node.js certification stuff is going on with everything, but is there a twist on a security set of questions there that we should hit on as part of this education? I'm asking because I don't know.
I also don't know. I think the plan for the paid certification courses, those are going to wind down
Ah,
2025. Yeah.
gotcha.
All
Cool.
right.
So, I'll
Yeah,
go.
let me know if
Ryan, go
anyone
ahead.
has other comments. Ryan at socket.dev again. And yeah, I look forward to working on this.
Awesome, Ryan. It's great to meet you, and thanks for your work on this. Really appreciate it.
Of course.
Alrighty, next we have Daniel from Samsung. So Daniel, you visited before. Not sure if everyone here was aware of the is aware of what you're up to. So how about we do some intros and then hop into the discussion?
Sure. So I am I have a lot of hats, right? For the purposes of Linux Foundation calls, I am Samsung because that's where my LF account is registered. My LFX account is registered. Um, that's because I participate in a number of Linux Foundation activities on behalf of Samsung Open Source Group, which is kind of like my main gig. And I am also um, I'm also involved in web standards. And where I co-chair the technical architecture group. I have a little bit of side news on that, which I can share just briefly. And then the work that I've been involved in that's relevant, most relevant here is it started with the Secure the Web Forward workshop that we ran last year, which was a W3C workshop, but it was held with people on the program committee from OWASP, from OpenJS, from OpenSSF. I also participate in OpenSSF, so I have kind of like a dual role there, and I'm interested in getting the industry together to talk about security issues. And so one of the things that came out of that workshop was a call for doing something more sustained activity, some more sustained activity around guidelines or communication specifically to web developers about security. And so out of that came this idea of launching a community group in W3C, which we did earlier this year. It's called the SWAG community group. And let's see if I can just find the community group home pages. Yeah, here we go. I can share a link if I can find chat. Here we go. Okay. And so we spun that up, and we've been having weekly calls and talking about what we could do. And yeah, that's by way of intro. I can talk more in detail about this topic, but do you want to do more uh, kind of scene setting?
Yeah, I think it'd be great for us to kind of baseline on what you're hoping to get out of this group. We've because of all the work we've been doing with also having security guidelines ourselves and understanding like how we can help, how this group can help you.
Sure. So also as a bit of kind of an intro, I was involved in the work to merge the um, JS Foundation with the Node.js Foundation because a while back I was on the board of the JS Foundation on behalf of Samsung. So I've been kind of on the fringes of the OpenJS Foundation for a while, and I know a lot of people involved. I've been working with Toby quite a lot because Toby's also involved in W3C activities. So and as well, Leah, who's been on the tag and is somebody who I've worked with quite closely. The side piece of news that I wanted to share before we get into this is the fact that we've just launched in the tag group that I'm co-chair of. We just launched the ethical web principles, and I wanted to just raise awareness here in this group about it because it's something that we think is pretty important as seen as a kind of like set of principles that will help to drive the work of the W3C. And we're trying to promulgate it as much as possible and drive people's awareness. It's relevant to security because one of the principles is the web is secure and respects people's privacy. And that principle very much links privacy and security. But it's also relevant because it's something that drives our work in terms of putting emphasis into security from an architectural standpoint and from a web standards standpoint. And I see Jordan's on the queue, so you go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up that the OpenJS standards group did discuss and review the ethical web principles back in September.
That's awesome.
And it was sort of brought to our attention last minute before the deadline of September 10th at the time. So there wasn't a lot of time to review, but I think in general, we were all on board and something was sent. So I think we did send a statement of support.
Oh, that's great.
But
That's
more,
great.
that's just the standards group. I don't think we surfaced that too broadly beyond it. So totally great to keep bringing it up in more venues.
Yeah, no, it's something that I think is going to have an impact in the way that we frame work in W3C. So like I'm already seeing it be impactful because we have a lot of other things. We have like this privacy principles document that we've been working on in TAG, and we have this long-standing document called the Web Platform Design Principles, which both of them have heavy linkages. We kind of base them on the foundation of the ethical web principles, which has been a document that we've been working. It's been percolating around for like 5 years, right? So this is not a new document. What's new is that it's been now published as a W3C statement, which means it has official kind of like backing or endorsement from W3C. Anyway, that's all I want to say about the ethical web principles. The thing that I'm really here to talk about is more the work of the SWAG community group, right? Which as well is being trying to bring together a community of people that work on web developer security. So this kind of like microcosm of, or the middle of the Venn diagram for open source and software security best practice and web developer security specifications and techniques and coding and stuff like that. So in to try to develop something that is like some of the artifacts that OpenSSF has produced in terms of concise guides. So OpenSSF has a concise guide to software development best practices, security best practices, for instance. And what we've done, one of the first things that we worked on, and this is a complete draft, like early draft, but we worked on something called Guidelines for Developing More Secure Web Applications, and I've dropped a link on that one. And this is based on the same thinking, the same level of detail, really, as the concise guides that OpenSSF has. So the idea is to have simple statements, general recommendations, do this, do that. We've tried to categorize them in various ways. And the idea being that we focus in on useful information for web developers, try and create an artifact that helps web developers understand the role that they can play in security, that it is their business. One of the feedbacks that we had from the developer survey that we ran last year was that many web developers don't think web security is part of their work at all, or that they would rather defer it to other parties. And so this is all about kind of trying to demystify some of the security, trying to make it more accessible to people, to web developers, and then providing links off to more information, right? And so there we have this, so that we decided to kind of focus on, at least initially, on two deliverables. One is this guidelines for developing more secure web applications, and then the other is a guidelines specifically for software libraries developers. So anybody working on a framework or a polyfill or a library that other web developers might import into their application. Because part of the idea here with the guidelines for more secure web, developing more secure web applications, is also to give developers some guidelines or guidance on how they should be evaluating libraries from a security standpoint, right? So that cuts to the point about giving web developers some understanding of software supply chain security, because this is the kind of gap that we're trying to fill, or one of the gaps that we're trying to fill. So the libraries document, which hasn't really been started yet, so I don't even have anything to share with you, is more going to be aimed at those library developers, and that's squarely in your domain. You know, a lot of the projects that are running through OpenJS are exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about, and so. So we've already been taking a look at the document, the matrix that you put together, I think that what we're probably going to do is work on something that's a little bit more like a document that you would read from front to back. So like the same kind of level of detail as the document that I shared. But what I want to do is I want to point off to basically reference your document to, you know, where appropriate, so that we can kind of have that as one of the citations that we reference. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. We just had our last call earlier today. It was abbreviated because we didn't have a lot of because everybody's heading off for vacation anyway. But we're going to be starting off in the new year, and we hope to be putting a lot of work into both those documents. And yeah, I'd like to do this, you know, in full view, full transparency, and get OpenJS input, get OWASP input, get OpenSSF input, and then hopefully get something within the next few months that really helps web developers and library developers, you know, level up their security. I should say one other thing, which is that the other constituency that's participating in the swag group is people that are contributing into MDN. And that is specifically the Open Web Docs group. So we have a number of people from Open Web Docs who are focusing in on web developer security documentation, and they are interested in, first of all, accessing a community of security, of web developer security minded folks, and also using using whatever information comes out of this work stream to make the documentation on MDN more valuable, more complete, make more sense. So we've already had a number of discussions, and they've all been minuted in our, and the minutes are all posted publicly, about CSP, for instance, and improving the information around that's available to developers around CSP, which we will funnel into our documents that we're going to produce out of this out of this group, but are also being funneled into MDN, with the philosophy being get the security documentation to where the developers are going to be looking anyway. So yeah, that's kind of the that's what I've got so far. Questions, Tobias?
Yeah, so thank you very much for sharing this and all the awesome content in this as well. And I think what's like question similar to what Ryan has been talking about, this degree of detail and like writing guidelines for developers is awesome. And I would like to ask your thoughts on what the incentive is for a web developer to like choose this guide from all the guides that are out there. And same for Ryan. I think that's, if you could talk about that specifically,
Yeah.
what the takeaway is, that would be awesome.
I mean, I don't think about it in terms of competing, because I think that the document that comes out of this group is going to be, released according to W3C's open license anyway. So, like, for instance, I want to I just want to make sure that whatever guidelines or anybody is giving to web developers, that we are kind of aligning, so that wherever developers go to get the information about security, they're getting similar information or information that also cross-links with each other, so that developers have a clear road to travel with regard to security. Because right now they're hearing different languages, and I'm not talking about like spoken languages. I'm talking about, when you go to the OpenSSF, for instance, and you talk to them about security, everything is about supply chain security. A lot of people are coming from the cloud community, so they're using totally different nomenclature and jargon and buzzwords than the people that are working in the web space. Likewise, if you go and you sit in a meeting of the the Web App Security Working Group, it's all going to be about how the specs that come out of that group are being implemented or being deployed. So what I'm trying to do is, get people talking to each other more than produce it. If nobody comes to this document, but we successfully influence documents that are coming out of other places, and specifically where the developers are going anyway, then it'll be successful. But specifically, I am also reporting on all of this work up to the Open SSF Best Practices Working Group. And what I expect is that any documents that come out of SWAG CG will also be republished out of OpenSSF. So at least we'll have two different bodies that are both publishing the same kind of material.
Yeah, so this sounds like really an awesome kind of framework to make, great content that's worth reading. Like, can you share how you plan to help people to like pick this guide from all the stuff that's like taught in universities and on YouTube and like on X, Twitter, like wherever. There's so much content on web security. Like,
Yeah.
what is your vision to kind of communicate? Okay, that's the incentive, that's the takeaway for a web dev to read this specific guide.
Well, I mean, one way is that we're going to use the the channels that we have available through both OpenSSF and W3C. So there'll be a lot of promotion from those. We also have, as much as possible, the folks, again, the MDN link is the other thing. I'm a firm believer that, and I've seen, the evidence of my eyes is that a lot of developers go to MDN to get content, to get documentation. So we're going to make sure that those documents are aligned with the work that we're doing.
Awesome. Last question is offensive security. Do you think there's value in like adding maybe some small sections on, hey, this is how you can actually like fast test your web app, or like some of the things that web devs are maybe interested in playing around with in the offensive way?
I definitely, and we don't have a work item on that yet. We're just that I really would value that input. Would you be interested in opening up an issue in our GitHub?
Yeah, of course, happy to.
Okay.
Just generic offensive web security. I mean, there's AI web security testing and all
just
kinds
generic
of stuff,
and then we can have a discussion on one of our calls. That's generally how we've been operating. We've been trying to raise issues and then use those as a framework for what we talk about in our calls.
Awesome. Yeah, happy to. You got it. Thanks.
There is one other thing I wanted to mention, which is that I just was in last week. I was at a cybersecurity workshop with Toby Langle. Actually, was there representing OpenJS, and it's related to, or this workshop was related to cybersecurity policy, and specifically the Cyber Resilience Act. And it was interesting to note that at least the opinion of some of the folks there was that the Cyber Resilience Act doesn't necessarily apply to websites, but that it might apply to web-based applications or web packaged applications, specifically things like Electron apps. And so in that sense, it does feel to me like this community needs to be aware of Cyber Resilience Act, because so much of, obviously you've got Electron, but other than that, there's all of these libraries that are being used in these types of package applications. So it's a community that's going to need to start being aware of the things like the Cyber Resilience Act. And that's not just, there's going to be other regulatory frameworks that specifically touch on open source and open source maintenance and security updates and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of, struck me that there's a lot of work to be done, basically.
So my reaction to that is, I think there's certainly a lot of work to be done in educating lawmakers as to what it's actually possible for them to regulate. It is not possible for them to regulate open source because it is a volunteer activity. So any law that they try to pass,
the Linux Foundation folks would disagree with you, but I'm not.
I'm just saying that
yeah.
I mean, they can write whatever they want on paper. I'm just saying that in practice, if they add a requirement that is too onerous for a volunteer open source maintainer, which is basically all of them, then those people will just not be in Europe or not participate in open source, and the law will then be unenforceable.
And there was a lot of discussion around that. I mean, I think that the way that my understanding of the way that it's written is that it puts an onus on stewards. And in the case of the
Like foundations.
regulation, OpenJS is a steward
Yeah, and
rather
because
than
the OpenJS is a business entity,
yeah,
as
yeah.
is a for-profit company,
So
obviously
so
these things can be regulated, and that's where it's
yeah.
relevant.
I mean,
But just yeah.
I'm not a lawyer, TM.
No, yeah,
Are
and I'm
yeah,
not like, I'm
you
more
know.
just sort of stating, not at you, but
Yeah,
in proximity to you, that like
yeah,
the foundation, all the foundations in general need to be aware of this stuff and need to be involved. But like general broader
yes,
open
and
source
yeah.
projects, like
But I often pay. Do you remember this? There's a good cartoon about climate change, right?
Mhm.
Where they're talking about what if we did all of this stuff and it turns out climate change is a hoax? Well,
Right.
we will have made the world a better place for nothing, right? And I kind of feel the same way about this. Or there's something similar about this because it feels like what what they're asking open source maintainers to do is actually what they
Mhm.
should be doing anyway, which is to have like a clear security flaws reporting policy and having a security.md, having a an ability to report
Sure.
security in security issues that are not where using a proper process. Some other artifacts, right? So I do, it felt to me like there might be something positive that could be pulled out of this, even though
Yeah.
I share your skepticism about regulators and but it does feel like there could be something positive that could be pulled out about this that could help to
Yeah,
level up security
100%.
across the open source in general.
And
Yeah.
I agree with you. And I'm doing all this stuff anyway. Like,
Yeah.
I don't anticipate that they'll ever even attempt to require something I'm not already doing. But like the difference is that applying in a governmental enforcement body to it and in consequences, that is a very different message than this is what we require of businesses and business
Yeah.
entities, and this is what we would like you to do the same thing, and here's why. And
But
I think that's where the difference is, where people aren't going to
so
get their hackles up with the latter, but they will if it's sort
So
of like it's now a
OpenSSF
crime not to
is
do it.
spinning up a global policy working group. And part of that is to have sorry to rat hole on this one, but just to raise awareness of it, they're going to be doing a global cybersecurity policy working group, and part of one of the work streams there is awareness raising, and I think that part of the awareness raising needs to be kind of like, hey, open source developers, here's what you really need to worry about when it comes to this, because I think actually, from my understanding from last week, the regulation allows for the fact that open source developers are not ready to participate in a kind of regulatory framework or whatever. So it's it it I think part of it is driving the awareness more to the people that are participating at this level, at the stewardship
Okay.
level, about what they need to do to help their projects, or to for a lot of it's communication and hygiene, open source hygiene stuff that needs to happen anyway. But anyway, it could be useful. Have a look at that. I think Open SSF is going to do an announcement this week about that. So yeah. Tobias?
I think it's interesting to Jordan. What you do probably is overachieving the cyber resilience act, just from what I've read about the regulation and also seen from the work you're doing. I think that's the idea that it might be a big opportunity. Actually, is quite interesting to explore, right? Where
Yeah.
the stuff that's required to do by commercial vendors, enterprises, large enterprises, pretty draconic. And I think if the open source community plays it well, then we can prevent something. Like look at the GDPR, right? So it's another, grand attempt of privacy regulation in the European Union, and that produced a kind of like spec gaming industry of GDPR consultants. And what I'm trying to say is we should probably prevent that every website has random SBOM generator at some point, which just produces some data structure, which makes it like impossible to go after the commercial vendors. And I think what
Security
could happen
theater.
instead, yeah,
Yeah.
like literally like
Yeah.
the cookie banner. If you look at the cookie banner in the European Union, it's a joke, right? It's an industry which was like spun up to essentially peace regulator because no IT vendor actually had any say and any understanding in like how the GDPR was supposed to work. And I think the open source community, like if we do it well, then we could even solve some of the long-standing problems in terms of how to actually compensate volunteers who are building open source when there's kind of like this compliant version of open source, for example, which is required by enterprise. I think that's a huge opportunity if if the perspective is not that bad regulator, but more like, okay, this is an opportunity if open source like moves faster than some spec gaming industry that just comes up with checking the box on compliance can move. I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Agreed. That's it from me.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. I think would you be able to suggest a next step for this group that we can so we can how to best engage with what you're working on?
What I would say is I think the ball is in our court to produce a first draft of this
Okay.
security guidelines for library developers, at which point I would really like to come back to get feedback from you. And so like I'm hoping that happens early in the new year, and then we can have that discussion then. Okay.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, I mean the other kind of we all need more calls and groups and GitHub things to participate in. So if you are so motivated, the group is open to anybody to participate in because it's a community group. So you feel free to go ahead and join. And if you're interested in learning more, come chat with me. I'm on the W3C Slack. I'm on the OpenJS Slack. I'm on the OpenSSF Slack. I'm on a lot of Slacks. I'm also at Torgo on Mastodon.social if you're so inclined.
Thanks, Daniel. We're looking forward to it. I think one of the things that I'm curious to see how things work out is that the guidelines that we've been working on are very much around the idea of how to manage your open source project. While I get the sense, and I could be wrong here, that you're more focused on how to architect or develop your open source project. Is that a fair
I
way
would
of
say
thinking about
that's
it?
fair. Yeah, it's also like which technologies should you be thinking about incorporating, and how should you be configuring those technologies, like CSP, for instance? That's all of that discussion is around that. I think there is going to be some discussion about how do you host your project, using two-factor authentication is one of those things. For instance, I don't think that's going to be an issue any further because GitHub is requiring two-factor authentication now. But it's those kinds of things that I think will also be a part of it. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what you come back with and how we can help. There was definitely I suspect there's an appetite in this group to talk about the kinds of problems that I think you're focusing on that we intentionally left to the side here. Like they came up here and there while we were working on stuff, but um, it was an intentional choice for us to not focus on that. So I think if you have thoughts or questions or like a place to discuss things, I think with a pretty technical group, um, I think we could definitely be one of those places for you to sound off and have discussion in the weeds.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming. All right, cool. Last item I have on the agenda is the checklist for security compliance guidelines. I met with John David at Lodash last week, and we went through the guidelines checklist, and I do have that done. I used the spreadsheet just to start. And I have some really interesting takeaways from that. So, one, the feedback was very positive, and he really appreciated and thought his feedback was doing it in a guided way was helpful for him versus being just given a checklist to work on was really helpful. Two, he had some interesting thoughts on things that he felt were missing, particularly around NPM permissions and management, and how like we were very in depth on GitHub, but we did not talk about NPM to that same extent. And he felt like that's definitely a place for improvement, and I took that feedback to heart. So over the holidays, expect me to come back maybe with a revision that hits on those points where he was surprised to say, like, you asked all these questions about this particular thing with GitHub, but you didn't ask any questions, similar questions around NPM, which was really, really good feedback. The other item I think that is worthy of note is that going through the checklist only took about an hour for the meeting, and that involved a lot of discussion and stuff along the way. So I'm happy to report somebody who has nothing to do with this. We were able to get through it pretty quickly. So I think that's a good sign for being able to get engagement from folks. The only thing I would say is that excuse me. The only thing I would say is that there was like a 15-minute intro, so we wound up taking about an hour and 15 minutes. So it does go a little long, a little over an hour, unless there's a lot of unless my takeaway from that is that there is definitely room for there to be kind of a thoughtful, time condensed introduction to the compliance guidelines to get that under 10 minutes so that we can kind of get to the point a little bit. I spent an extra time with him because he was one of the first and wanted to explain to him how he could give good feedback and things to think about along the way. I also captured some notes on the things that took longer for him to produce an answer on than others. Some things were instantaneously easy. Some things actually took quite a while. And my takeaway from that is to better help. One of the things I think I took away from that was that the guidelines should also have a very specific. We referenced the docs in GitHub, for example, on where on the topic, but that does not mean that still took a while to go look through to be like, okay, where was this thing and what does it mean? Because GitHub's way of describing stuff is, and their documentation can be pretty dense at times. And so I think to expedite the process as well for some of these checks is to actually have how do you go decide whether or not you're yes or no on this very quickly, like basically go here, 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 here really quick to go do that. And another item that could have made it faster was that some of the items were asking questions in the same area, but they were in different parts of the questionnaire. And so I'll be going through to see if we can kind of chunk together those, if it's possible to kind of reorder things a little bit, to chunk the things that are in the same question set where they're looking at the same information can be done like more quickly. So those are the big takeaways, but feedback was very positive. He I think the quote that I captured and I sent to Ben afterwards was that this is absolutely necessary, and he was a big fan. So I think the next steps are Jordan and Ulysses um, taking a shot at filling out the spreadsheet async and seeing their feelings on it before the holidays. So hopefully, just not even because you don't need me, you don't need an explanation. It probably should take even less than an hour for you all to go through it. I'll
Can
send
you
you the.
drop
I'll
that
show.
link? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I will send that to you. I'm going to clean up the spreadsheet I used a little bit because what I did was I had the way I had him answer questions. It was like, whether there's a hard yes or a hard no. There were things that were just simply NA. And then there was like, no, but planning on it. No, we will never do this. And no, we need to talk about, we need to think about the next step on this one. So with those options, I'm curious to see you two go through it and see whether or not there's places to improve on that. So let's see, what else was there? There was one last big one I wanted to mention. Oh, his biggest feedback was really his biggest point of feedback was also that there really should be two lists for projects that are really solo maintainers and ones that are not, rather than having the conditional there is like, oh, this one only qualifies if you have more than a few maintainers. Rather than doing that, just having two separate lists, he thought that would make things a little bit smoother. So I thought that was reasonable feedback. Ulysses.
Yeah, that's a very good feedback, honestly. I was reviewing some of the text this weekend because I was see like if we can computational digest them or not. So I was basically doing like an offline running of the full list, like just up to the recommendation level. And the thing is like something that I miss, for example, there was curious. This is like we don't have any check related to licenses. I mean, aside of something like the projects will have the compliance license or whatever, right? That's part of the foundation. But the thing is, might also having some requirement on knowing or checking the licenses for other projects like that you depend on, right? So like dependencies and stuff. And the other thing that I was thinking about is like for reducing the time to mitigation, because some of this stuff might be tricky. Like for example, some of the rules might be organization level. So you go to your GitHub organization or multiple GitHub organizations and you do the change on the UI, but other stuff required to be on the repository level, or you change at the org level, but doesn't affect retroactively to the repositories that you have, right? So for example, you can say like branch protection from now on by default, but doesn't compare the old project to that. So that basically you have to do like a huge effort. And the idea there was like, if aside of the dashboard makes sense to start thinking on scripting for these kind of things, so we can provide like a mitigation path, right? So it's like you should enable branch protection by default. If you're happy with that, here's the command to run, right? So you can basically start to apply these kind of things and you have the script publicly done. So it's all using the API of GitHub, but more easily applied, right? So you don't have to go UI level. So you have like both ways, especially when you have to deal with all your repositories kind of changes, right? Which is quite often, honestly.
That's actually great feedback, Ulysses. I think those are great call outs, and I'm totally with you on that. Jordan.
Yeah, I actually disagree with that two list feedback. I think that's assuming a single package maintainer. It's actually pretty common for people to be maintaining more than one package, one of which might be a single maintainer and the other might not. And being able to know that the only differences between those, the only diffs between those lists are, what those things are. I think that's valuable information. I think there's lots of different ways this could be presented. And if it's just in straight up text or markdown, it's probably limited. But like, I think there is like I would want to see a single view with like kind of flowcharty as opposed to or showing diffs or something, as opposed to having to look at two separate lists and then do two separate steps or sets of steps where I might mess up because I'm not sure what the differences are. And
It's
also,
a
if
really
I'm
good
used to the
call out.
steps for a single maintainer package and then I add another maintainer, what's the likelihood I'm going to be aware that I need to go back and go through a whole different set of steps if I've never even seen that there's a difference for having two maintainers?
That's actually a really good point, Jordan. I think it's a really good call out. Thank you, Daniel. Have a great holiday. See you next year. Yeah, Jordan, that's actually a really good call out and feedback. So I think these are things that we can tee up after we go through it with you and Ulysses. I think I'll be working on some edits to the list and cleaning things up on feedback. He also had there were some where the phrasing was not as clear, or the phrasing was confusing, that deserves a little bit of a cleaner rewrite and things like that. So it's a bunch of little things. I'm looking forward to working on that over the next few weeks before we start working on the next group. So we're basically at time. So I appreciate you all. We had like a really great meeting today. Next steps is I'll follow up with Jordan and Ulysses so we can just get those done this week. And looking forward to seeing what Daniel brings to the meeting once they're working on stuff. And so thank you very much, folks. This is going to be the last meeting of 2024. So from me and my family, I hope you all have a great holiday with you and yours as well. So is there anything else folks have before we drop in 45 seconds?
One small
Oh,
thing.
Ulysses.
In 1 hour, we have like the first deep dive session for the people who want to contribute to the dashboard and all of these things. So feel free to welcome. We will record the session anyway if you cannot attend, so that's okay.
Thanks, Ulysses.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for running the show and also for the update on the compliance checklist. It was pretty cool. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tobias. Jordan.
I just want to say, if this is the end of the year for this work, then that's fine. But if as soon as possible, I would like to get moving on that CNA stuff and get that going.
Yep.
So if not before the end of the year, then as soon as possible in the new year would be great.
Sounds good. Yeah. So I think most of the pre-work is done now. So we're just waiting for them to get the call scheduled. So see if we can get something done quickly. Otherwise, hopefully early next year. So thanks, Jordan. Okie doke, folks. Take care and have a great holiday. Bye-bye.